Hi, my name is James Julius, and today I'm going to be interviewing two women so we can hear their stories on domestic violence. 1 in 3 women are affected by domestic violence, and what I'm here to talk about today is the story and the survival of one individual, and of another of how she's been involved in advocating for Alina's Law here in Pennsylvania that provides electronic monitoring protections to those who are suffering from domestic abuse. Please listen in. I look forward to you hearing more about their stories. Sasha, someone that's been involved with Alina and Ellie and the Sheykhet family from the very beginning. Tell me about her. Tell me about Alina. Tell me about Ellie. Tell me about how did you first get involved with them in this process?
So I first got involved with Alina and Ellie when I was assigned as a pro bono PFA attorney by my firm to go and represent PFA applicants in a hearing that was supposed to be happening for Alina and for several others on that date. And the date was October 5th, 2017. I still remember that very, very vividly. And when I walked into the room, I almost immediately recognized Ellie and Alina. I could pick them from the crowd. If I could paint just a perfect picture of a mother and her daughter, both are really beautiful, smiling, welcoming, sincere. Alina was very eloquent. She had a lot to say. She explained the situation. We went over the documents. What we also found out, unfortunately, is that at that time, the PFA defendant have not been served. And so that meant that there would not be a final hearing on the PFA, and we would have to have a delay or a postponement. But in talking with the two of them, with Ellie and Alina, what I found myself wishing for is that I could just have all the good things in the world happen for the two of them. It was difficult not to, because again, you see this beautiful, bright girl. She was talking about her university studies. She was talking about what she wanted to do with her future. And in her mom's eyes, what you can see in any mom's eyes is this pride and joy. Like, this is my beautiful girl. Like, she's going to have so much to give to the world. And there's also a little bit of that even through all those smiles and joyful feelings, you could sort of see in her eyes this concern that once again, every mother would have if her child would be in this situation, that I certainly would have. So that's how we met. And unfortunately, we did not have that hearing, the final hearing. I wished them both all the best. I told Alina, listen, this is going to take a couple more weeks, possibly for the defendant to get served, for the family court to set a new date. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. You'll be fine. We'll get that protection for you. And we parted. She was smiling then, just as she was in the beginning. I had a very uneasy feeling because I was thinking to myself, this is, even after we do have this PFA hearing, and of course I could not know what would happen a couple of days later, it's just going to be a piece of paper. I really want this girl to be safe, but there was something they just did not have a good feeling about. But I thought, hey, I'll see them in 2 weeks. We'll do the best we can, and we'll go forward from there.
What did the next few days look like?
So as her PFA attorney of record, I was going to receive the paperwork from the court announcing the new date for the permanent PFA hearing. And where we left it, I was going to make sure that they had the date, that they were available on that date, and also potentially meet with them ahead of time to sort of describe to them what to expect, what evidence we were going to present and how the hearing was going to go. Because we really didn't get to do much of that on the 5th, simply because we figured out that he wasn't served and there was going to be no hearing anyway. So on Monday morning, I wasn't necessarily expecting it on Monday morning, but on Monday morning, that was October 9th, my pro bono coordinator wanted to see me and said, hey, if you needed to talk or anything like that, we're here to support you, if you need anything. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought maybe he had questions about the report on the cases or something along those lines. And so I asked him, why would I need to talk? He said, oh, my goodness, well, you didn't hear what happened. And so then he told me that on October 8th, just 3 days after this failed PFA hearing, Alina was murdered. And at that point, we didn't know the details, but just the fact that I just spoke to this beautiful girl and her mom, and however we failed her, and when I'm saying we failed her, like, you feel responsible, right? You're going back over all of these could have, would have, should have, what could have you done as a lawyer, what could have police done, what could have court done, like, you feel like we failed her as a system, right? So we should have been able to do something for this beautiful girl to be alive, and we didn't. And that was very difficult. Another thing that was absolutely heart-wrenching is we did get a word of Alina's funeral. And of course, I wanted to come to the funeral and see if I could, talk to Ellie for a little bit. I don't even remember what I said, and I don't remember what she responded, but there were no words that could have, helped any of this. So that was a very difficult thing to do. Following this, the family had a victims' right advocate that sort of walked them through the criminal process, the criminal trial. There was no trial, but through the investigation and the charges that were filed and everything like that. And my understanding is that that advocate was very, very effective and helped them tremendously. And then following this, I heard of Alina's law that would, in Alina's case, would have saved her life, potentially. And I just remember hearing about it and thinking, this is the best thing that could ever, if anything good could ever come out of this horrible story, this would be it.
You've been involved with Alina's Light since early on in its inception. Tell me about how that came to be, and then how it was also ended up being connected to Alina's Law.
So when something like this happens, and when you're a part of it, I think I would speak for everyone to say that you have this awful feeling that you cannot undo what has happened, but you really want to help. You really want to help to do something. You want to help. You want to help prevent this from happening again. The way I got involved with Alina's Light initially was not through the law. They had several community events, and I was in absolute awe, of course, of Ellie and Jan, because to survive this horrible tragedy, to literally die with your child in spirit, if not in body, and then bring yourself up and open your heart again to people and to say, I really want to help you in Alina's memory. I want her legacy to continue, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to help the community. So I thought that was incredibly generous and wonderful of them, and I wanted to join sort of their efforts to see if I can be of any help. So initially this was with community outreach, and then we started talking about art as a form of healing, and so I wanted to be involved in that. And that's really my main role right now with Alina's Light, is we're helping domestic violence survivors or families of the domestic violence victims heal or overcome their horrible place following fairly tragic events through art, through community engagement, through bonding with people who are in a similar position and potentially help themselves heal. But also on Alina's Law, again, I thought that was a tremendous tool that could be used for the victims' protection. And I got involved with their victims' rights advocates that I believe helped shape this law. Following it passing the Senate, once it got into the House, and I understand that there were some issues or some feedback that wasn't necessarily entirely positive, that's when I got involved with the attorneys who were already working on this law to see if there are some suggestions that we could propose to make this law passable.
So how did you first get involved with Alina's Light?
So I was interviewed on the news, and I got touch and base with the reporter at the time, and I got Ellie's number, and then I contacted her, and we started texting. And then in April of that year, there was an event at Point Park, and we met each other for the first time, and I wanted to show her the monitor. So they could show everybody, everyone could visualize and see actually what it is. And I did get to speak there as well in front of everyone.
So, Amanda, why don't you start by telling us your story? When did you feel that a PFA order was necessary, and what did you feel was happening in your life that made you want to seek legal protection?
Well, a PFA was necessary far before I went for a PFA. It was just out of fear of going for it because he threatened me. And it was called the grand finale. And that was if I got a PFA, I went across the street to my neighbors, told my parents, told the cops. He said that he would bludgeon me to an inch of my life, break every bone in my face. The surgeon would have to peel the skin off of my face and reconstruct it, and I'd be unrecognizable or pretty anymore. And he'd point with his fingers and go, look at my eyes. Do you think I'm ready? Because I'm ready, I can do it. So I was afraid to get a PFA, but the abuse was getting closer and closer and more sadistic and violent from day to day. So the last night I decided before I left, and I woke up, did the plan, and then the next day immediately got a PFA.
Tell me about the electronic monitoring. When did you find out that electronic monitoring would be available for you?
Okay, so when we got the PFA, a week later, not even a week later, he violated it. He spent a night in jail and bonded out and told his brother not to let anybody know that he was out. But whenever I went to the state troopers for the violation, they saw the PFA and they saw the things that he did, and they asked me if I reported it. And I did not. I didn't know what to do. So I went to the Peters Township Police, because that's where it happened, and they did a report and conducted an investigation. And the investigation went from October until December. Right before Christmas, the detective told me these are charges. There were 21 criminal charges, and I believe 15 of them were felonies. And that was from June until October 1st of the same year. So I said, yes, proceed. They picked him up on the charges. They took him to the magistrate, Jesse Pettit, which I'm forever grateful for. He denied him bond, and he put great concern for the victim's safety was his reason. So he sat there for a month, and we had a hearing. With the hearing, the ADA told me, you will have to agree to something. So I think it was $250,000 straight cash, pre-trial probation, and then the GPS monitoring. And that's when I learned about that even existed. So after that hearing, they took me up, and I gave addresses and anywhere I would go. So my daughter's school, if I would go to the gym, my work, anywhere. And they would put that and put like a radius around there where he can't enter, and I would get alerted.
So roughly how big was the radius?
I'm unsure about like the specific location, but I do know that it was around 2 miles if we would be driving in our cars in the same area. So then I would get a text message and right away, and then one of the workers in the unit would call me and would notify me and notify him. I always stayed put, and they would make him stay put as well, and then tell him that he has to go back home and leave the area.
So when you had the electronic monitoring in place, did that give you a sense of safety, or did it, what did you feel like whenever you actually had that available to you?
Thankful. I could breathe. I could somewhat live more free, because when I fled, my home sat there. We took what we could out of garbage bags. We were in hiding for a month. Drove a different car for a while, and it was really hard. I didn't go back to work until February, until he got the GPS monitor, because I didn't feel safe to even go to work, because I worked different shifts, and just in general, I did not feel safe. So I was able to breathe. I felt more free. I was able to somewhat live a life. You have fear no matter what, whether you have the monitor on or not, because I was abused for nearly 19 years. So you're mentally and emotionally not there. You're afraid in those ways with trauma, but at least you have a monitor to wear to keep you safe, to know if I cross paths with him, I'm getting a phone call. If I'm sleeping in bed at night, I don't have to worry about him coming into my home or going to my parents' house or going to my work, going to my children's school. That was a big fear as well. We were all safe.
I had read a response from the ACLU, and it said sometimes these monitors could give people a false sense of security. What did you feel like in that moment, knowing that you had this ability to have him tracked and monitored? And tell me about, like, if someone's saying that they don't want you to have a false sense of security, what would be your response to that?
I mean, I think the issue is with anyone who says that they've never walked that path, they never had to fear their life and live a normal life and go about their way and think that someone isn't going to harm you, someone isn't going to kill you. Because I knew, I felt it, I really felt it, that if I didn't go, it was days. I mean, days. I saw it in his face, the things he was doing. So people really need to learn to empathize with others. Be thankful you don't have to live that life or never did. But they need to realize that safety is a priority. Because if I did not have it, I can guarantee that I would not be sitting here.
One of the things I understand about Alina's law is that shortly after her tragic murder, this was introduced as a bill into the Senate, and it had cleared judiciary and the Senate chamber relatively rapidly compared to most legislation. And it was at that point that the ACLU had given feedback about the bill. What do you remember about some of the ACLU's points that they had raised at that time?
Well, some of those points were fairly fair. And, you know, this is not just talking about Alina's law, any law that gets drafted and that gets out for a vote, you have to make sure that you are very careful about not violating certain constitutional protections that are afforded to everybody. And to make sure that there's due process, adequate due process of law, to make sure that nothing is arbitrary, and to make sure that the punishment, although in this case we didn't talk about punishment so much as about monitoring. Whatever action that the law proposes to be imposed on the defendant, in this case PFA defendant, is not so grossly disproportionate to the crime that was alleged to have been committed. And, you know, for Alina's law, that this person would have been convicted of a certain type of a crime. And one of the issues that came up was the continuous monitoring. You don't necessarily want to overstep, right, into somebody's private life and to remove any protections from them and for them to be continuously under scrutiny. So what we suggested is to replace this continuous monitoring bit with the proximity alert. And you know, even at the time when the law was drafted and when it was passed Senate, even in the form it was drafted, this could have been done through different definitions within the law. This could have been done through changing the language of the law itself. There are many things that could have been done. With vast advances in technology, because another complaint we've heard that, you know, technology, there's no technology right now that would allow this piecemeal monitoring and proximity alert. It would have to be continuous. You know, a person would have to be continuously plugged into the system for this to happen. And that's just simply not true. We do have technology now that allows for this proximity alert, for a notification. This is not the case where a person is monitored all the time. This is the case where if the person is prescribed from entering a certain territory, a radius around the victim, and that would be within their PFA, within the terms of the PFA, then there is a notice that goes out to the victim, maybe to some of the people the victim designates, family members, friends, whatever else, maybe to law enforcement, but this notice goes out saying that, hey, this person is within a certain proximity, you need to get to safety, you need to do something. And then at that point, that person can decide to get out of the area, to get to a public place, to call the police, to call their friends, to do something to protect them. You know, at this point they know, and at this point they have a chance to get away to safety. So those were the issues, and for the most part, and I felt like they were easily overcome by certain language tweaks to the bill, which frankly we proposed.
So when the original bill was a Senate bill that came in the 17-18 session and went over to the House following the ACLU's feedback, and the bill had stalled in judiciary in the House. And then in the subsequent session, it was reintroduced in the House, which is reintroduced 3 subsequent times, where all times up until the most recent one, it was again stalled in judiciary. Why do you think it's been so difficult to maintain support for the original protections that the bill afforded?
Probably because the guidance, the advice, and the assistance we received in order to address all of those issues that were brought up were never followed up on. And so if somebody comes to you for an advice, and you give this advice and you're earnest and you say this is what you need to do, and then we will change our mind or we'll support it further or whatever else, and if that person goes away and does absolutely nothing, and you sort of stop talking to them, maybe because you understand that whatever advice you give them, right, that's gonna fall on deaf ears. Nothing's gonna happen. And so we had a similar situation where we've gone to the U.S. senators for support, for funding support, for advice on how to make this more passable and what to do. Because at that point, you know, realized that we have attorneys, we have Sheykhet family, we don't have lobbyists, you know, working with us. We don't really understand the process based on what is described to us, right? I still don't understand what happened in the Judiciary Committee and why it sat there, regardless of how many questions I asked, right? So, but we went forward and had conversations and received certain guidance on how to overcome certain things and what needs to be done and who needs to be approached. And we turned back and relayed all of this information, or made our suggestions, did our homework, and gave all the suggestions, or passed on all the suggestions that we received, and then nothing happened. And so going back to those same people for the second time and the third time made absolutely no sense. And so when you see inaction in response to your help and advice, I mean, I don't blame those people for not continuing to support us, because it just seems like nothing happened.
Yeah, so just to sort of restate and to clarify, it sounds like there were many people that were interested in this bill from a bipartisan point of view. And when the ACLU provided feedback, they provided sort of a playbook of the things that they expected to see addressed. And not only that, you and other advocacy groups were helping to speak into, you know, how this law can be improved such that it can clear out of committee. And it sounds like those considerations were really never brought to light in the bill. And so it's like you guys weren't being heard and weren't being listened to.
Yes, absolutely. If you look at the bill, the way it was initially introduced in the House, and you look at the bill, well, not today, right? Today it was completely gutted, right? But or a few weeks ago. But up until a few weeks ago, it remained the same, even though we did make suggestions on how to tweak it, rewrite it, not necessarily rewrite it, but tweak it, or add certain definitions that would address all of those concerns that were brought up.
So this is a little bit of what we were just talking about. It sounds like the external support and the advocacy around Alina's law, it might be waning because the lack of progress in the House. Is that something that you would agree with, or would you characterize it maybe differently?
I'd say if we show some progress, or if we show that we are listening to those who were given guidance, the support would be there. Because again, everybody we spoke with agreed that yes, we should protect those who need it most. We should protect victims of domestic violence. The support did wane, but I believe in response to inaction. So if there's something to happen where we show that we can follow this advice, follow all the concerns, address all the concerns, I believe we could gather the support for the bill again.
So Sasha, the most recent iteration of Alina's Law is Pennsylvania House Bill 1150. It was introduced in the current 23-24 session. It's House Bill 1150. And I understand that we were notified in September that this was advancing out of committee, but it might not be the same bill that we were used to following. Can you tell me a little bit about what your understanding is of the bill and how you were notified about it?
So I did not hear about it from the legislators. I heard about it from Ellie, and from what I understand, her understanding of what was happening wasn't very clear. She couldn't explain to me what was going on. She just said that it's changing, and that this is going to be something different. When I read the draft of the bill as it currently is, I don't see any connection to Alina's Law in its original form. Alina's Law was written as a protection, as an added protection for victims of domestic violence. And it was ultimately created to save lives and to prevent the horrible abuse to the victims and to prevent the horrible trauma for their families, for their friends, and for us, for the society in general. Based on what I'm reading now, this is a grant funding legislature for the DA offices. It has nothing to do with the domestic violence. It could fund programs that, again, have nothing to do with domestic violence or helping the victims.
And it doesn't sound like you or the other attorneys who were advocating this were consulted prior to the bill adjustments being made.
No.
So as an attorney, as an advocate, as someone that's been following Alina's Law for so long, do you think that there's still a path forward for this law as it was in its original form?
There has to be. I'm talking about the original Alina's Law. I don't know very much actually about the current bill and what it's designed to fund and everything like that, but for the original law, it's criminal not to. We do have the tools, we have the ability to protect victims of domestic violence, to protect their families, again, to protect all of us. I have an ability to protect my girls. Every parent sitting out there has the ability to protect their children. Why would we not take advantage of it? And this ability, mind you, so we're not talking about something that's so novel, this unicorn law out there that violates every tenement of the US Constitution. We're still trying to shove it down somebody's throat. Absolutely not. This law that exists, not necessarily as written in Alina's Law, but it's in some statutory form. This law exists. These protections are available in 26 states. And up to a few weeks ago, there's several other states that had similar pending legislation. And again, up to a couple of weeks ago, Pennsylvania as well, that give statutorily, give these tools, give this discretion to add a protection to the victims of domestic violence during the PFA process to the victims. So this is not something so outrageous that can never be passed or that can never withstand constitutional scrutiny. If anything, the law is designed to help the defendants fight false accusations in court, right? Because if there is a proximity alert device that both parties are equipped with, and if that device does not go off, or there's no data connected with the PFA defendant entering the certain prescribed radius, right? And there's no data suggesting that they were anywhere near the victim, any kind of false or mistaken accusation that this person had violated the terms of the PFA could be very easily brought up in court and could serve the defendant. He or she can say, no, I was never in that area, I never came close, it was not me, and the data will be there to back it up.
So what message would you like to send to legislators, who have the power to move this law forward so that they understand why this law matters?
The message is do it. I don't know else how to say it. This is so important. This is so incredibly important. We can talk about statistics, and I'm always hesitant to do that, although they're horrific, honestly. I believe looking at 2022, there were some 38,000 PFA applications granted as a temporary PFA. And that not all of them get to the permanent PFA stage for a variety of reasons. As Amanda was sitting here talking, you know, people could be absolutely terrified about what would happen to them if they go through the PFA process or whatever else. So we're talking about 38,000 people who are terrified for their life, you know, for their well-being. Would it be worth it to protect them? Yes, absolutely. You know, even if we go down the statistics, and again, using numbers in these cases is a dangerous thing, because we start talking about numbers. We start talking about, oh, in 2022, 119 people were killed as part of, as a result of the domestic violence. Oh, about 67% of all of the PFAs likely get violated. About half of the victims who are murdered had some form of a PFA protection in place. When you look at those numbers, when you start looking at percentages, numbers, and everything like that, you forget that we're talking about real people. You forget that we're talking about Alina. You forget that we're talking about Amanda. For any single one of them to be here today, for those who had passed away, it's worth the legislative effort to try to save them. It is worth it. Every single life. And then from there, you can go back to the statistics and say, hey, we're not just talking about one life. We're talking about hundreds of lives every year. We're talking about the ones who don't survive this horrendous abuse. And that's awful in itself, but we're talking about their survivors too, right? We're talking about the children who witnessed their parents being murdered. We're talking about children who live with horrible violence on the daily basis, who then carry that forward, right, as a trauma into their own relationships. We're talking about, if you want to make it about money, we're talking about enormous resources that are being spent on, hospital treatments, on rehabilitation, on relocation, on all sorts of things, where if this law is in place, it can address all of those things. It can offer enormous tools of protection to those who need it most. So my message is, please do it. Just do it. It's criminal not to.
I think that it's vital that anybody who makes a decision on Alina's law and the GPS monitoring, to take this as an opportunity to be proactive and not reactive. So if you have the GPS monitoring, you're being proactive. You could possibly be preventing a death, where you're going to be reactive. So it's very important that they take this seriously, because when someone abuses you and they say that they're going to kill you, and you're full of rage or whatever reason you are abusive, they're probably going to do it. So we can't just not take things seriously. Someone's life is in your hands by making a decision that could save their life.
As someone who's worked so closely with Alina's Light, what would you say to the public and the community? How can they help be involved, to be engaged, and how can they help still continue to drive and push for meaningful change?
You know who your representatives are? Call them. Call them, make sure they are aware that it's very, very important to you. Vote, by all means. Go and vote. The way you can see the change that you want is by doing something to bring it about. Be involved with the organizations that support the victims of domestic violence. Be active. Today we're talking about statistics. We're talking about Alina. We're talking about Amanda. Tomorrow I'm going to be talking about my own girls. Tomorrow you're going to be talking about your own children. This is very important. Domestic violence is such a prevalent and horrible thing. Every 1 in 3 women, I believe that's the national statistic, and that's the Pennsylvania statistic, and generally you look across the board at various counties, 1 in 3 women experiences domestic violence, at least at some point in her life. That's horrible. We got to do something to stop it. And we can. That's the thing. We can. So we should.
So earlier this year, Speaker of the House Joanna McClinton had introduced a bill, and the purpose of this bill was to reduce the pardon threshold for those serving life without parole. The clemency process is that it's required to have a unanimous vote of a pardon board of 5 individuals. The purpose of her bill was to reduce it from 5 individuals requiring a unanimous vote down to 3 out of 5. The Democrats had all voted in favor of this bill, so all of saying 3 out of 5, and the Republicans have voted against it. The Republicans came back with an amendment and said, well, instead of 3 out of 5, let's make it 4 out of 5. Let's try to make this bipartisan. I'll meet you halfway. Every Democrat had voted against that bill. The soundbite of this that I'd like for you to be able to respond to is that Matthew Darby, who has been sentenced for murdering Alina Sheykhet, Matthew Darby and his rights have been prioritized above Alina's. What is your message to the legislators that have seemed to prioritize criminals who are serving life without parole over domestic violence victims?
Well, as you're speaking, I'm listening to every word, but I'm also trying to figure out what would possess them to do that and think that it's okay and it's all right. And I think everybody needs to learn to empathize with others. We're all human beings. These victims, whether they were murdered or they are alive, they're victims. And to live in fear or to possibly be murdered, and to think that the person who could do it or has done it can walk freely, that's okay. I mean, my ex-husband is up for parole every year now, and the opportunity to speak, and I'm very thankful with the parole board. And since I'm alive, and that's my voice, I get to speak. It's not easy, but I know that it's playing a part to keep him in there, possibly, but to think that he's going to be out one day, what will happen? What is going to happen? How am I going to live my life? And I pray to God my daughters are old enough where we don't have to worry about them being exposed to him as teens or as children. So that's a big fear. But to think that it's okay that someone could be a violent and very deranged individual could walk around, and that trumps over someone that has lived the worst trauma in days of their life, and they're going to have that come back to them and worry. I don't understand. They have to learn to empathize with people, to wear their shoes. I think that everybody should do that in life. You know, wear someone's shoes and see. They're not just a number. They're not just anybody. They're a human being.